If your kid's 12 or 13 and dreams of becoming a professional footballer, this is the most important age. Because the habits they build now, the football that they're exposed to, and the people that they train around will decide what level they can reach later, for the most part. In Europe, kids their age are usually training 5 or 6 times a week in professional academies. In Australia, it's usually only twice a week, and that is where the gap starts. With a little help from my friend ChatGPT, I've actually mapped out the exact difference between a Spanish football player and the average Aussie player between the ages of 12 to 17, those real pivotal 5 most important development years that we have. So the gap between Europe and Australia. Now, if we're looking at Spain, we're looking directly for that Spanish footballer, the market I understand. So Europe, the average footballer in those ages will be doing 5.5 sessions a week. Alongside those 5.5 sessions a week, they're also training 45 weeks of the year. Now, between 12 to 15, that is 5 years. In Australia, on average, the average Aussie is really only doing 2 sessions a week. And we are not training 45 weeks of the year. It's really, for us, with our seasons, a lot closer to 35. And of course, we're going to times this by 5 years as well, like I mentioned, the 12 to 17, that major gap. Now, this leaves us with the average European does 1,238 sessions between 12 and 17, and the average Aussie only does 350 sessions. Now, what makes this really interesting is that the gap. What actually is the gap? It actually comes down to my favorite number, which is really funny when I actually did this, 888 sessions. So on average, when we exclude the fact that Aussies might do some private training, or maybe even in Spain, they might do some extra private training. If we're just focusing on fundamentally people that are only using their club and their training schedule, this is the gap that we get. From the ages of 12 to 17, the average European player is literally having 888 more sessions with a club than the average Aussie. So you're aware, that is 3.5 times more. That's more football, that's more exposure, that's more experience than our players are getting here. When you visit a Spanish academy, you see it instantly. The training, the intensity, the discipline, just the structure of it all. Every drill has purpose. Every player understands why they're there. And for the most part, the coaches actually correct their mistakes. And it's not because they're more talented. I think there's a big misconception that we think, the European player is more talented than the average Australian player. But it's not that. It's not talent. They've just been fortunate enough to be exposed to those environments from a very young age. And being immersed in that environment ultimately leads to everywhere else in their football career. The football mindset becomes normal. Competing becomes normal. Working hard becomes normal. And foundationally, their routines are built around football and not just a side quest from school like our system is. Most parents just want to give every kid the best chance possible, but not to push them, but just to help them grow. Which, if you're a parent watching this, I do commend your effort to help, guide your child as best as possible. The question then becomes, how do we expose them to this level as early as possible and as much as possible? The short answer, almost impossible to replicate within Australia. Look, you do what most parents do, which is spend a lot of money on extra private sessions. But from my experience, 9 months of Australian football equates to about 3 months overseas with a professional club. Now, this ultimately gets me to the talk of, sending them overseas. Most parents hesitate to send their child overseas too early because they think it's about pressure, but honestly, I think it's more about giving them perspective. It's showing them what's possible if they stay committed and disciplined, and ultimately, it's the only way of truly showing them the level of work ethic and commitment needed before anyone can even start talking about contracts or scholarships. We've taken players as young as 9 to 13, overseas, and what really stands out isn't just, how fast they improve, because that's just natural that happens. It's actually how much they mature. Besides the ball skills, they do come back hungrier, sharper, and more confident. I guess when they see kids their own age living and breathing football every single day, it sort of clicks, it just rubs off on them. And there are some things you just have to experience firsthand for it to have a real impact in your life. I think this football thing is really one of those. We had a dad recently head overseas. He has 3 kids and he wanted to go over just for a couple of months just to expose the boys. I think that the ages were 9, 11, and 13. And something that he mentioned, they all went to the same club, they're all, training every day. What he really loved about the experience was, he said the youngest one, the 9-year-old, didn't really want to play. He was just very nervous. He was sort of like not really interested in football. It took him a really long time to sort of open up while he was overseas. But how they opened up, how the youngest opened up, was that not only was he going to the sessions at this professional club, during the day, they would walk around, Madrid, and they would just be cage football everywhere. And so the boys would go and they would just play pickup cage football every single day on top of their actual training. So they were just getting 2, sometimes even 3 sessions a day, obviously unorganized. But he said that he saw the most improvement there with their boys, and then stuff that they saw other kids doing in the cage matches, they then took to the professional academy sessions and were replicating it. And he said that it was just like the most beautiful experience. All his boys like just all over football. They started watching football again. They like fell in love with the sport again, and he saw like a huge culture improvement within his own family. And I think that's very interesting perspective to have, is that he walked away, he had a 9-year-old that was not interested in football whatsoever, went over for a couple of months, and now is more obsessed than his brothers. And I've never really had that. I've had, people point out, how the academy coaches are really cool and they've learned so much and this and that, or they've matured, but it's really interesting to get that other perspective where, someone is raving on, telling everyone that you just have to try just being around the culture, not even just the professional club. And I think that's ultimately what we're lacking here in Australia. I think that's ultimately the thing that you can't replicate. Sure, I can tell you 888 sessions, you're going to make up for it in those 5-year windows, but it's not just 888 sessions. That number really gets doubled or tripled, or even sometimes 10x'd, because these kids aren't just doing those sessions with the clubs, even though it's more sessions. They're also doing sessions in the street. They're doing sessions at school. They're doing sessions everywhere. And so a lot of times they're training, minimum 14 times a week. They're kicking a ball. And that's part of the culture, right? Because we can't expect, Australian clubs to start training you 14 times a week. No, it's too much. Do we need to start training 5 times a week? Yes. Do parents shouldn't need to actually go and get private coaching to make up for it? Yes. But ultimately it's just a culture thing. For us, football is a side quest, and over there it is just the lifestyle. And so that's what you can't replicate. That is what would be impossible to replicate. And look, that being said, nothing of what I said is about chasing a professional contract at 13. That's not really my point. It's just about laying that foundation. So when they're 17 and they really are about wanting to go pro in football and then look at getting a career in football, they are just way more prepared for it. And they can just be ready for that opportunity when it comes. Most players don't fail because they're not good enough or they're not ready. They fail because they didn't build the right habits early enough. And here's something most people don't realize. You're probably already spending a small fortune on football as it is. Now, to the money talk, because everything is always about the money, I have done the numbers for you. The average MPL or academy season costs around 2,500 AUD, and I'm being conservative there. When you add 2 private sessions a week at about $60 an hour, that's another 5,700 a year. Then you've got trials, events, tournaments, easily another 2,500 to upwards of 10,000 plus, right, will be spent here. But for argument's sake, let's just focus on the season and the extra private trainings. 10,000 a year for 4 training sessions a week in the same environment at the same level of intensity. And 2 of those sessions are usually private academy sessions that don't really help much because they're not even in a group. Now, let's compare that to training inside a professional European club. Assuming you get accepted, assuming we're not going super premium, but we're also not going very low, just a good first, mid-tier, second high div club. If we remove flights and accommodation, you're looking at about 4,500 euros. It's about 7,400 AUD with today's average rates. And with that, you'll get 6 to 10 sessions a week for 12 weeks. Roughly 70 to 120 sessions, all run by UEFA qualified coaches and surrounded by players living that lifestyle every single day. So yes, on technicality, it is more per session, but every one of those sessions is real environment, real feedback, real exposure. I've been doing this for over 7 years, and from my experience, 1 year in Australia is equivalent to 3 months overseas, talking strictly development wise. And when your kid comes back, they are different, not just technically, but mentally. They know what it takes now, and that awareness alone can change the direction of their career. Look, ultimately, if you're a parent in this space, I don't envy you. There is so many options out there, most of them garbage, and navigating what is best for your family, both value-wise and budget-wise, that's tough. Best advice I can give is just do your research. Like I said, I've been in this space for years and I understand a lot of the pathways available in depth. And I'm still pretty headstrong on being able to say that this is the one I think makes the most sense for the most amount of people in Australia. But again, what do I know? I've only been working as a full-time football agent for the last 5 years. If you enjoyed this video and you think a friend might get value from it, please consider sharing it to them or dropping me a like or even subscribing. Helps me make more free value content for you guys. And if you are interested in the space, there's a link down below to the website. You can speak to one of my support agents. They'll guide you through anything free value on the house.